Hi, boys and girls. Welcome to your math lesson today. This week we've started talking about the calendar and time in math. We did a little bit of calendar work the last 2 days, but remember that time is not just measured in reading the clock. And I know you're excited to learn that, and don't worry, we are going to get to the clock very, very soon. I know we've been anxiously awaiting that this school year. But time is also measured in minutes, in hours, in days, in weeks, in months, and in years. And so before I get to our lesson today, we're going to do a little background thinking. I want you to see if you can think right now how many months there are in a year, okay? Take just a minute. I want you to see if you can remember the names of the months and how many there are. I'm going to give you a minute to think. When you think you have that information, I want you to put one hand on your shoulder. Okay, so be thinking, how many months are there in the year? Start naming them to yourself. Okay, maybe jot them down if you need to. But when you think you have that number in your head, how many months are in a year, put your hand on your shoulder. Okay, give you just another few seconds to think. Okay, now what I'd like you to think of this time is how many seasons are in the year. See if you can remember how many seasons and what their names are. Okay, so you have one hand on your shoulder thinking of how many months in the year. When you think of how many seasons there are and their names, I want you to put your hand on your other shoulder. Okay, I'll give you a minute to think. Okay, if we were all together sitting there, I would be looking for understanding and seeing if you had your hands on your shoulders. I might even ask a friend to share, but since I can't see you, we'll just carry on this way. Okay, hopefully you've been thinking. Let's do a quick check, okay? So first, on this side, I asked for you to see if you could tell me how many months are in the year, okay? And maybe even name them. And so first, I'd like for you to take a second and tell someone that's sitting there with you, maybe mom, your dad, your brother or sister, your stuffed animal, your pet, how many months were there? Any volunteers? The answer is 12. Yes, hopefully you guessed it right. There are 12 months in the year. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Okay? On the other shoulder, I asked you to think of how many seasons there were and if you could remember their names. Okay? So take a quick second. Tell whoever's sitting with you, how many seasons were there? Anybody have a guess? That's right. There are 4 seasons. 4 seasons in the year. Spring, summer, fall, and winter. So there are 12 months, 4 seasons. Okay? Before we get to our lesson, I'm going to share a fun story with you about this as a weather book. And then we're going to talk about what weather has to do with the seasons and the year. This one is called Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. One of my favorites to read. It was written and illustrated by Judy and Ron Barrett. Okay, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. I hope you enjoy this one. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table. It was Saturday morning. Pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for juice. Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we each could eat. And Grandpa was doing the flipping. Seconds later, something flew through the air and landed toward the kitchen ceiling. It landed right on Henry's face. After we realized that flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully. All the other pancakes landed in the pan, and all of them were eaten, even the one that landed on Henry. That night, touched off by the pancake incident, Grandpa told us the best tall tale bedtime story he had ever told. Across an ocean, over lots of huge bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 smaller ocean, there lay the tiny town of Chew and Swallow. In most ways, it was very much like any other tiny town. It had a main street lined with stores, houses with trees and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and some assorted cats and dogs. But there were no food stores in the town of Chew and Swallow. They didn't need any. The sky supplied all the food they could possibly want. The only thing that was really different about Chew and Swallow was its weather. It came 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. Can you imagine getting your food from the sky? Whatever the weather served that day, that was what they ate. But it never rained rain. It never snowed snow. And it never blew just wind. It rained things like soup and juice. It snowed mashed potatoes and green peas. And sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. Whoa. The people could watch the weather report on television in the morning, and they would even hear a prediction for the next day's food. Wouldn't that be something? When the townspeople went outside, they carried their plates, their cups, their glasses, forks, spoons, knives, and napkins with them. That way they were always prepared for any kind of weather. If there were leftovers, and there usually were, the people took them home and put them in the refrigerator in case they got hungry between meals. The menu varied every day. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was already coming down. After a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny-side eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast. Butter and jelly sprinkled down for the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterward. For one day for lunch, frankfurters, another name for a hot dog, already in their buns, blew in from the northwest at about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby. Then the wind shifted to the east and brought in baked beans. A drizzle of soda pop finished off the meal. Sounds kind of like a picnic. Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by gradual clearing, with a wonderful jello setting in the west. The sanitation department of Chew and Swallow had a rather unusual job. It had to remove the food that fell on the houses and sidewalks and lawns. The workers cleaned things up after every meal and fed all the dogs and cats. Then they emptied some of it into the surrounding oceans for the fish and turtles and the whales. The rest of the food was put back into the earth so the soil would be richer for the people's flower gardens. Life for the townspeople was delicious, until the weather took a turn for the worse. Spaghetti ties up the town. One day there was nothing but gorgonzola cheese all day long. The next day there was only broccoli, all overcooked. And the next day there were Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. Another day there was a pea soup fog. No one could see where they were going, and they could barely find the rest of the meal that got stuck in the fog. Oh no, what is happening? The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were happening. On Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread and rolls all day long and into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, some with seeds and some without. There was white bread and rye bread and whole wheat toast, and most of it was larger than they had ever seen before. It was a terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors. Roofs were damaged, and the sanitation department was beside itself. The mess took the workers 4 days to clean up, and the sea was full of floating rolls. To help out, the people piled up as much bread as they could in their backyards. The birds picked at it a little bit, but it just stayed there and got staler and staler. Once there was a storm of pancakes one morning and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. A huge pancake covered the school. No one could get it off because of its weight, so they had to close the school. Imagine that. Kind of like us with our school closed, although not because of a pancake. Lunch one day brought 15-inch drifts of cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick and ended the day with a stomach ache. Once there was an awful salt and pepper windstorm accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tornadoes. The town was a mess. There were seeds and pulp everywhere. The sanitation department gave up. The job was too big. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time. Many houses had been badly damaged by giant meatballs. Stores were boarded up and there was no more school for the children. So a decision was made to abandon the town of Chew and Swallow. It was a matter of survival. The people glued together the giant pieces of stale bread sandwich style with peanut butter. They took all their necessities with them and they set sail on their rafts for a new land. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well enough for them to build temporary houses for themselves out of it. The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find themselves a place in the new land. The biggest change they had to get used to was buying their food at a supermarket. They found it odd that the food was kept on shelves and packaged in bottles and cans. Meat that had to be cooked was kept in large refrigerators. Nothing came down from the sky except for rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs, and no one ever got hit by a hamburger again. Nobody ever dared to go back to Chew and Swallow to find out what happened. They were too afraid. Henry and I were awake until the very end of Grandpa's story. I remember his goodnight kiss. The next morning we woke up to see snow falling outside our window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate it a little faster than we usually could so we could go sledding with Grandpa. It's funny, but even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter at the top, and we could almost smell the mashed potatoes. What does it look like? That pat of butter and mashed potatoes? Perhaps the sun shining over the snowy mountain. The end. I hope you enjoyed that story, boys and girls. I always like to share that one when it comes to talking about the weather, because it's just such a fun story, the town of Chew and Swallow. Now, I read that story because the weather does have something to do with the seasons. When we were talking about the 4 seasons that there are, spring, summer, fall, and winter, one of the things that makes each one of those seasons so different is the type of weather and the type of temperature that we have. So yesterday morning, you had to write in your journal about the difference between spring and winter. Although it did snow here the other day, but typically that's not common for spring. So you had to think about what was different between spring and winter, and then you had to write about what your favorite season was. And one of the things that makes all of the seasons different is the type of weather that each season has. And when we were talking about the months of the year, we said that there were 12 months of the year and 4 seasons. That means that each season lasts for 3 months. We started the season of spring in the month of March. And in my class, we talked about the month of March having a little expression. We said that March sometimes comes in like a lion and goes out like a lamb. And if you remember what we said, the reason for that was that March starts in the winter, but it ends in the spring. And oftentimes the winter is more stronger, it's more volatile, kind of stormier. And then by the end of the month of March, since spring has started, it's often quieter, more peaceful, more gentle breezes. Not always the case, but just a fun way to think about the month of March. Now, in the month of April, there's another fun little saying that goes along with the month of April that kind of ties into the season as well. And that is the saying, can anybody think of it? It's the saying goes, April showers bring May flowers. And that's right, because as the springtime starts to come around, most of the time the snow is going away. The weather is getting a little bit warmer. It's getting a little bit, there's more hours of daylight. And often in the spring, especially in April, it tends to be a little bit rainier. We know that the trees and the flowers and the grass have been dormant all winter. That means they were not growing. And in the spring, they need water to grow and they need sunlight. And so often in the spring, the weather starts to change to be more rainy and things like that to help all of the flowers and trees and grass to start growing again. The weather starts getting warmer, which takes us gradually into the season of summer when it's normally very hot. And it usually stays that way for several months until we get back to the fall. Then our weather starts to change again, and then into the winter, and it continues. So I wanted to read that story to you just to kind of give you a fun little connection with the weather and how it relates to the seasons. So for your math today, you're going to be working on this page today, okay? And it has a picture of the 4 seasons, and it has the name of the 4 seasons on the opposite side. And what you're going to do is just match up the season, the picture of the season, with the name of the season on the other side. And then, of course, down at the bottom, there are a couple holidays listed because most of the seasons in our year have holidays in them too. And so it'll ask you to see if you can think of what season are each one of those holidays in. And just for something extra, see if you can't make yourself a list of the 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter, and write down some characteristics of each. Maybe write down some fun facts about each season, things that happen in that season, some other holidays that you know that are in those seasons. And that way it kind of gives you something to look forward to as we're finishing up our school year in the next couple months here. We'll be finishing through the season of spring and heading right into summer. So I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you enjoyed our math lesson today. It's obviously not the same as if I were sitting in front of you and getting to call on you and talk with you and interact with you during the lesson, but I do appreciate your time and your attention today, and I hope you're enjoying the lessons that we're preparing for you. And again, I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. But for today, enjoy your math and have a wonderful day. Thanks, boys and girls.